What if someone stood up for you in your time of need, and then you left them hanging when they needed your help? Hi there, I'm Chris with a K, and welcome back to This Week in Queer History, where we celebrate queer moments and icons that I wish I had known about as a young gay kid growing up in conservative America. This week, we're exploring one of the fiercest, most unapologetic, and revolutionary trailblazers in queer history, Sylvia Rivera. She wasn't just at the front lines of the Stonewall uprising. She helped define what our fight for freedom actually means. She was loud, proud, and impossible to ignore, and I am so thankful for that. So let's dive into a story of courage, struggle, and love that deserves to be shouted from every rooftop.
This week in queer history, stories told with love and glee.
Let's talk Sylvia Rivera, a name that should be shouted everywhere during Pride, but for too long was sidelined, erased, and nearly forgotten by the very movement she helped build. Born on July 2nd, 1951, in the Bronx, Sylvia's early life was marked with tragedy. Her mother died by suicide when Sylvia was just 3 years old. And after that, Sylvia was raised by her Venezuelan grandmother, who disapproved of her gender expression. It wasn't long before she found herself living on the streets, turning to sex work to survive. It's a heartbreaking origin story, but not a rare one for queer youth, especially trans and gender non-conforming kids. And I think of queer kids today who still run away from their families because they're rejected. And I think Sylvia's story is still their story. That's something in our society that we haven't fixed completely yet. At just 11 years old, Sylvia was taken in by a group of drag queens who gave her the name that would become legendary, Sylvia Rivera. She found her chosen family, her identity, and her purpose. In the late 1960s, New York's Greenwich Village was a haven for many queer people, but it was also a place that was constantly under siege. Cops raided gay bars like clockwork, and the mafia-owned Stonewall Inn didn't have a liquor license, they didn't have clean glasses, and you could only dance with someone of the same sex in the dark behind closed doors. And yet it was a refuge. Sylvia was just 17 when she found herself at the Stonewall Inn the night of the riots, which began on June 28, 1969. And while accounts differ about whether she threw the first brick or arrived later or if she was even there at all, what's undeniable is that Sylvia Rivera became one of the most vocal and consistent advocates for trans and homeless queer youth in the wake of Stonewall. She teamed up with her friend and fellow activist Marsha P. Johnson, another legendary name in queer history, and together they founded STAR, Street Transvestite Action Revolutionaries. STAR wasn't just a group, it was a lifeline. Sylvia and Marsha ran a shelter for homeless trans and queer youth, paid for by whatever money they could hustle. They created one of the first trans-led activist organizations in the US, and they did it without permission, without funding, and often without the support of the very LGBTQ movement they were fighting for. And this is where, looking back, I start to get mad. Because Sylvia, this icon, this trailblazer, was often pushed aside by mainstream gay organizations that wanted to present a more respectable face to the world. In the 1973 Gay Pride rally in New York City, she was actually booed off the stage by her own community. Why? Because she demanded attention for trans people, sex workers, and the homeless. People the movement had deemed too controversial or too embarrassing. Can you imagine? The same woman who was willing to get beaten by the cops, who fought for the right to exist, who risked everything, was told to sit down and be quiet. But Sylvia never shut up, and I'm so thankful for that. In 1994, on the 25th anniversary of Stonewall, she returned to the front lines, and she criticized Pride for becoming too commercial and excluding the very people who started it. She called out hypocrisy, whitewashing, and the sanitization of queer history. In one of her most famous interviews, Sylvia said, "I'm not missing a minute of this. It's the revolution." And it was. Her revolution never ended. Sylvia also identified as both a drag queen and a trans person, long before there was widespread language or community understanding for the fluidity of gender. She was Latina, working class, and unapologetically loud. She showed us what it looks like to care about everyone in the room, not just the ones who are easiest to celebrate. She died on February 19th, 2002 at the age of 50. But before her death, she had the chance to see see the tide turning just a little bit. The Sylvia Rivera Law Project was founded in her honor in 2002 and continues to advocate for trans rights, especially for people of color and those in poverty. Sylvia's life was not easy, but it was brilliant. Her legacy is a reminder that queer liberation was built not just by the well-dressed and the well-connected, but by the loud, the poor, the trans, the sex workers, and the dolls. The ones who never got status, but who gave us the street to march on. If you're enjoying this deep dive into Sylvia, you may like the weekly queer history highlight that I send out. Sign up with the link that is popping up right up here or down in the description below. I've talked about this before, but looking back at my own coming out journey, I realized that I had a very long way to go with acceptance. Acceptance of myself, acceptance of others. And even though I was gay, I was still carrying a lot of internalized homophobia. I was so scared to be around people that were really queeny or drag queens. When they're not performing, I was like, forget about it. I didn't want to be around them. And I was so far away from understanding trans people or the trans experience. And I still don't fully understand what it's like to walk in a trans person's shoes, but I do understand the value of showing up for them. Just like I begged the straight world to accept me as a gay man and give me space, trans people are doing the exact same thing now. They want to be loved, they want to be accepted, and they want to be left alone to live their lives. That's it. And honestly, shouldn't that be simple? It's not a radical request. It took me so long to really realize that the way forward for us, it's not about being seen as acceptable by straight people. It's about embracing all of who we are. The loud, the fabulous, the angry, the messy, the fierce, and yes, the queens and the trans women and men and the non-binary babes and everyone in between. The people who don't look like us or act like us or fit the boxes we were taught is normal. This is why Sylvia's story matters so much right now. She demanded space, and she created space. She refused to let anyone erase her or her sisters, no matter how uncomfortable that made people, especially within the gay community. I think about this a lot now when I walk into a gay club or a big gay event, and I see that the majority of the people are white, cis, buff men dancing to the latest remix. I think, where is the Sylvia in this room? Where is the Black trans person, the older lesbian couple? Where's the non-binary person? Where are the people who don't fit in this very curated, very mainstream image of what it means to be gay? And more importantly, how do we make space for them? How do we make sure that they feel welcome? Because here's the truth. If our spaces aren't inclusive, they aren't liberating. We can do better. And I have to do better. Sylvia Rivera reminds me of that every time that I think about her. Now it's your turn. Had you heard all these stories about Sylvia Rivera, or was there something new you learned? Is there anything that moved you, maybe even challenged you a little bit? Let me know in the comments. I genuinely want to hear from you. And if you want to keep exploring the dazzling, complicated, powerful past that brought us to this moment right here, be sure to check out this video that's popping up right over here. Until next time, stay strong, stay bold, and keep making history.